My name is Mike Taylor. I used to be in Elsevier Labs. I actually need to owe you a new biography because I moved into the Infometrics group last year.
Oh, yeah.
So I've gone on a little bit further than that. So I'm going to start by talking about where I see the future of impact to be coming from. We've heard a lot today about counting stuff, and this has been very much how we in the publishing world have been deriving ideas of impact, by counting stuff. And it's a real comfort zone for us. I mean, people like us have been doing this for 40, 50 years, so we have a great deal of familiarity with how to count stuff. And we have this really simple paradigm that we find links. Now, whether we're using it in Scopus or World of Science or Google Scholar, we count those links. And then we do this interpretive thing, which is probably as complicated as interpretive dance. We have statistical things, and we have these enormous extractions, abstractions, if you like, of saying, well, if this is happening, then this must, so we have a high impact factor, this must mean that it's a highly influential journal, this is a very important journal. If you're inside this very important journal, you're a very important researcher, and if we try and interpret citation counts, we're doing this stretching of the meaning of what those counts were implied and designed to do. But we've become very comfortable with numbers, so we know that 18.7 is a high impact factor and so forth. So I'm not going to be critical about how we do that approach, but I want to express what I feel means is going to be the future of how we start to think about impact over the course of the next 10 years. I feel that there is going to be a revolution in the way that we deal with these things, because we're in a situation where we've been using more or less the same intellectual property to understand impact for 40 or 50 years. And actually, the rest of the world is way beyond that. There are other ways of dealing with these problems, and there are other people who are working in these same sorts of problems in other fields. And this sets up the field very nicely for a strong revolution in the area. So my first question is whether altmetrics is in fact the revolution. Now I'm pretty much Mr. Altmetrics in Elsevier, right? There's 3 or 4 of us, but I'm one of the Mr. Altmetrics. It came out 5 years ago, and it just hit me between the eyes. It was like the thing that needed to be done. There was a manifesto. I love a good story, right? And a manifesto, I get the red flag out, I charge up the hill, I start waving it around and cheering about it. I'm still as excited about altmetrics as ever I was. But I do not feel that it is the revolution. And I'm going to explain a little bit what we're doing here. So I'm not here to sell Scopus to you, but Scopus has got an altmetric module. We take in data from the Scopus citation counts, SciVal, Mendeley, mostly from altmetric.com. And the reason I'm showing you this isn't to showcase the awesome new altmetric tools in Scopus, although they are awesome, and I am responsible for the awesome mathematics. But to tell you, this is a really, really unusual paper. It's got so much activity. It's got blogs, it's got tweets, it's got Mendeley. It's got pretty much every kind of piece of data that you want. And I had to look really hard for this paper, because for the most part, if you go onto Scopus and you go and look at the 2.4 million papers that were published last year, mostly you will see citations, and mostly you will see Mendeley counts, and you will see nothing else. This is a bit of a problem if we are proposing to use altmetrics to understand anything beyond an indication of altmetrics. It's too small. It's not fast enough. This is a graph of 2.4 million articles that were published last year and indexed in Scopus. We can see at the top that out of those 2.4 million articles, there was 0 interest in almost everything. Ignore everything that says bucket. Those are my aggregated scores. But if we look at the bottom there, we've got Mendeley. 60% of articles published last year have been added to Mendeley. Most of those have been added more than once. The second indicator, the thing that's supposed to be slow and the thing that's supposed to be replaced, the thing that the altmetric manifesto was set so strongly against, is citation. If citation was an altmetric, we'd be thinking it was the second best, coolest thing going. And other than that, really, there's Twitter. So we're seeing about 18% of papers being indexed get some form of tweets. They don't get very many tweets, for the most part. They get maybe one, they get maybe two. I'm going to show you a really nerdy graph in a minute, which you will just hate. But 5 years after altmetrics, 5 years of all this excitement, and we have some facts that we can talk about. We know that, for example, if we look at citation rates across disciplines, huge variation. So we've got chemistry and chemical engineering right at the top, massive amounts of citation going on there. Right down at the bottom, arts and humanities, social sciences, mostly published in books, books not indexed as much, books very slow, not much citation going on. We don't see that in scholarly networks. If you look at CiteUlike, if you look at Mendeley, we see really smooth periods of discipline activity, which is really interesting. It tells us something that we didn't know before. It says that people are using these platforms, they're using it with intentions other than citation. There's a really good paper, I was going to put a link on there, I decided against citations for this presentation. This is my fourth presentation in a week. Guy called Mohammadi Ahsan and Professor Mike Thiebel wrote this paper about why people use Mendeley, what they're doing on Mendeley. Not very surprisingly, about a third of people are going, we're adding papers to Mendeley because we're going to cite it. And other people are saying, well, I want to use it. I want to read it. I want to share it with my friends. There's all sorts of motivations so that when someone adds a paper to Mendeley, they're not just doing it because they want to add it. They're doing it with a strong intention. I'm really looking forward to seeing more activity in the research around this field. Mendeley does have open data, so lots of research I hope will happen. Citation, as we know, it peaks, depending on your discipline, peaks between 18 months and 8 years. So it's still accelerating after a year, 18 months, and don't forget that graph I'm showing you, those were 2014 papers, so they're papers that are a year old. The citation rates are still accelerating in their density. Mendeley is still accelerating in its usage. Everything else is pretty much over. If you get a paper out there and it hasn't been tweeted within a month, it ain't going to be tweeted. This is a simple fact that we can tell by looking at 2.4 million records from last year. Twitter is incredibly, intensely focused. This is one of the things I get really excited about, because you look at the number of tweets that were about scholarly papers last year, and there were like the millions of tweets. Really, really exciting, until you start looking at a seriously nerdy graph like this. So 82% of papers get no tweets whatsoever. So that's the top left-hand corner. By the way, this is normalized. My axes are wrong. Right up in the top hand. So 82% get nothing. About another 15% get one or two. Nearly all the activity is down there. So there are actually very few papers, and they're getting tens and tens of thousands of tweets. So it's very, very hard to see this. And this is why we don't see very strong correlation. This is one of the reasons why we don't see very strong correlations between anything like citation and Twitter. Because the data is completely different in terms of its characteristic. Whereas citation is quite evenly balanced, citation is understood as a principle. Twitter has this intense focus. It's like staring at a camera flash and then looking into a dark room. It's completely different kinds of data. Very, very hard to understand what's going on there. Because although there are plenty of tweets about the penile size of whatever, there was a couple of years ago, there was a fantastic paper which was an autopsy of a chicken nugget that got a huge number of tweets. I mean, really scientific piece of paper, you don't want to eat chicken nuggets. Not unless you like entrails. But for the most part, it was serious science that was being tweeted about. You know, that's serious science going on there. These are people talking about things which are highly impactful in human society. But it's not very good at explaining what's actually impactful. So I conclude broadly that altmetrics is not the revolution, that altmetrics is an increment. It gives you a different view on what's going on with research, but it's not the answer that we're looking for. So, you know, we ask these intense questions about how is my research being translated into society? How is it being used? How is it benefiting it? Can we quantify it? We ask these enormously complicated questions, and we're not going to be answering those questions using altmetrics. It's the same paradigm, right? And we're doing the same things we've been doing the citations for the last 40 or 50 years. We're finding a source, we're counting the source, we're making these extrapolations to try and stretch the meaning of those counts to explain what it means in society. And we're going to fail, because this is a very poor quality paradigm. If we think about the data that we're missing, even from a lowly citation, and it's great to count citations, and I love it when I've written something that gets a citation, I get that email that says, you've been cited by someone. It feels pretty good. But it's not the best thing about citations. It's not telling us where those citations are coming from or who they're being used. It doesn't tell us about the language of the sentence that is making the citation. It's not telling us which fact is being transferred from your research paper to someone else's research paper. It doesn't give us any indication of the transfer of information, of knowledge through a network. So I conclude at this stage that at the moment altmetrics really doesn't show the promise to be a revolution. It gives us a really valuable insight. I am Mr. Altmetrics. Altmetrics are awesome. Altmetrics on Scopus, also awesome, but not the revolution. This is my revolution. Right? I love this picture. It doesn't have very much data to it. It's a photograph of Europe taken from a satellite. Maybe there are 10,000 dots, maybe there are 100,000 dots. There's not very much data. But the amount of interpretation we can do, because it is not a citation-based type proxy, it's a photograph of an actual thing. It's something dynamic. So we can see centers of population. We can see, particularly in Russia, transport infrastructures. If we've got Africa on the map, it's cropped off there. We can actually see the borders between countries. We can see the physical boundaries. We can see mountain ranges. We can do real interpretation with the data, this very simple form of data. And I find this kind of thing to be very, very influential and very stimulating when I start thinking about what we can derive from networks. So this is another graphic. I'm not responsible for this graphic. I didn't take the photograph of space either. Okay, this is an image which is created by a program called CiteSpace, which is run by a friend of mine, Chao-Mei Chen at Drexel University. This is a representation of Drexel's output for 5 years. It's using keywords to bring together the articles. We've got indications of burstness, of hotness in certain topics. For me, this is really interesting because it gives you a view into what Drexel is doing. Different colours represent different years, so we can see the change of how a topic is changing over the course of years and how Drexel's work is involved in it. Looking at machine reading documents, another way of building up a network, and this is a small section of the virus corpus, again created by Chao-Mei Chen using some software that we're developing together. And in this case, Chao-Mei is pulling out sentences. He's pulling out the assertions inside scholarly documents to make maps of the assertions. And in this case, all these labels, these are all automatically created. The boundaries are automatically created, and the topics are automatically created. And in this case, he's introduced a new document, a novel document into it, which is represented by the red dots. And he's saying this is what this new document is adding to the existing corpus. Now, for me, this is a really interesting thing because it gives us the opportunity to talk about impact and how science is transmitting ideas without worrying about the citation rate or Twitter counts or anything else like that. It gives us a different view into building up a network. So there we go. Blah, 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 blah. Come and see my play next month in Oxford. Is that it?
Yes.
It's very good. It's very funny. I'm directing.
Very good. Extremely good.
Thank you.